indeed. And Jane's back, and Jude is going to come back and join us, I think, and turn his picture on in just a second, because what we want to do now is pick up on the things that Jane and Dave have said to us, and pose some questions to you. I'd like to begin that process by asking a question of Jane, specifically to start with. Somebody put a message on the chat there and the Q&A, and they said, surely, well, their question was about their confusion about the word holy. And if we're called to be holy people, how does the idea of being gay or trans fit into that? That's what's always thrown at them.
Yes, absolutely. This and holiness is absolutely what we're called to, but I think holiness is deeply misunderstood by many. I really recommend reading Nadia's Boltz-Weber's book Shameless, and she has a whole chapter on this, where holiness is about union with God. It's about our relationship with God and with one another that puts forward a fragrance that is magnetically attractive. But for far too long, the church has mistaken holiness for purity, which is very much about a separation from something that an individual tries to do, and that can lead to despair. It can certainly lead to pride. Holiness is something that emanates from us because of the relationship that we have and the way that Christ is at work in our lives. And I believe that holiness can be seen in all sorts of unusual places, but the church's quest to try and suppress people and make them into things that they aren't has caused, if you like, a stench rather than a beautiful aroma to come forward.
Jude, how does gay Black Christian achieve holiness?
I think that the first thing I'll say is that we can achieve holiness in all of who we are. Being holy does not reduce, being gay and being Black does not reduce our holiness. And I think that we will accept that there was a time where, white Christians believed that Christianity is for white people and not for Black people. And of course, if we're going to then look at the history of colonialism and the missionary hand in hand, let's look at even the story around the abolition of slavery, where white people still believe that Black people were only good as cattle and sheep to be sold between them during the slave trade. So come on, people. And when we now begin to talk about sexuality, I want to say that our holiness is connected to our queerness. And I would say that we are divine in all of that. I'm divine in my Blackness, in my queerness, and in my Christian journey. I just want to kind of relate it very quickly with what Jesus said about, when they would challenge him that, the disciples did not wash their hands before eating, the whole sacrament thing. And Jesus said that, what we eat does not defile us, but what comes out of us. I think that we should be looking out for the behavior of people that continue to attack the beautiful creation of queer people. And because that behavior, homophobia, is part of that problem. Transphobia is part of that. God doesn't matter how you come to God, but God wants you to come to God with a heart that is filled with praise and grace and joy.
Great. Thank you, Jude. Dave, can I ask you a question? You've talked about open house. So 2 questions about that. If others are interested in something like open house in their church setting, is there a way that you can support them?
Yeah, they can contact us through Oasis, the webpage, the oasiswaterloo.org, and you'll see the webpage of Open House there. There's lots and lots of groups that are doing things, and Open Table and things like that. But where we are slightly different is ours is mainly based upon sharing our stories and supporting each other. It's not a liturgical thing, it's just sharing together. So they can contact me via Oasis Waterloo.
And somebody else has asked about Oasis and youth programs or others and programs for young people.
There's online, there is the Diverse Church, which meets, and I haven't got the address of that, but we can always get that to people. At the moment, there isn't much going on for young, gay, Christian, LGBT people. There's lots going on within the secular society. Metro Charity and people like that run some fantastic groups, youth groups. And if you just do a search online, you will find the gay youth groups. But for young people of faith, especially under 18, there isn't much going on within the youth work. Some of the youth services are fantastic in the churches, but they're not confronting or looking at the issues of the young people identify as LGBT. So we need to work much more on that. And some of the Christian youth workers that are here today, I know some of them are doing fantastic work, but it probably needs to be put together.
A number of questions have come in and comments around from the trans community. So we've majored on L and G, perhaps even a little bit of B, but what about T? Who wants to go first? Jane?
Perhaps I could take that, Steve, although I appreciate we don't have a trans person with us on this call, and it's so much more important really to hear from them. Our trans friends are twice as likely to be put through some form of conversion therapy, are far more likely to experience vitriol and hatred and violence against them. And I think the way that the church community has othered them, has misunderstood them, spoken about them without being in the room, I think is horrific. So the way we need to give them a platform, we need to listen. As I mentioned in my own presentation, we are doing some research. I've teamed up with most of the trans organizations, and we put out a survey. We'll be putting out the results in 2 weeks' time that show the impact on faith on the trans community. And can I just say, I think if you're listening to this call thinking, what can I do? First is ask your vicar, what would he do or she do if a trans or a same-sex couple came into their midst? What would their reaction be? And get them to start thinking about it. Secondly is to look at inclusive church. Thirdly is to engage with the Church of England's Living and Love and Faith materials when they come out. But most importantly, invite people to speak. People like Dave, or if you're not sure of members, just come to me and Gide. We can put you in touch with all sorts of people. Hear our stories, and hearing a trans person's story is probably the most important of all.
Could I just relating back to something Dave said earlier before we move on? Diverse Church, their web address is just Diverse Church, one word all the way through, diversechurch.website. And if you go to diversechurch.website, there's lots of resources there. And as Dave said, this is about diversity, not just the LG and B bit. And it's also for younger people as well. Jude, I'm sure as you've listened to Jane and Dave, you've got things to say into this as well.
I certainly do. And very quickly as well. And I think that talking about trans people, and Jane, you are totally right. I think these are also times where we have to be more proactive in how we, put these conversations together and who needs to be around that table. But I can say to the people on the program today that there is another program that starts at 4 p.m. It's been organized by Living Free UK, which is an inclusive Black-led LGBT organization here. There are going to be four Black transgender people on a panel, and they're going to have a discussion. So this is something that we can tap into, and I can share that with you. The program is called Black Excellence. They're looking at Black History Month, and they have this amazing 4 trans people that are going to be on the program today at 4 p.m. You can look for it on Eventbrite. Now, of course, we do have organization. House of Rainbow primarily is developing a program for queer people, queer people of faith under the age of 30. And we have about a dozen more people who are going to be part of that initiative and developing it. There are other groups in the UK called like Blackout UK, UK Black Pride. Rainbow Noir is in Manchester. Micro Rainbow is right here in London. And there are many other groups as well that support, issues around Black queer people. But House of Rainbow primarily works with issues around faith and sexuality. Thank you.
Great. I think I'd like to just bring Dave in to say something about the trans group. that's part of Oasis Waterloo, and then I'll pick up with a comment about the future.
Yep. When we started Open House, we also felt about 6 months in that we needed something for trans, and we were praying. And Stephanie, who comes to Oasis Waterloo, set up Torch. Now, I can never remember what Torch stands for, but it's a trans group that meets once a month on a Saturday. At the moment, it's on Zoom, so it's not face-to-face like Open House. But that's a group that has a support for trans men, trans women, any person that identifies as trans, to go along to. Is very, very supportive. Also, at Open House this Tuesday, we meet on the third Tuesday of each month. We're looking at you fall in love with a person, not a gender. And we've got a couple coming to speak to us on Zoom. And if you'd like information on that, please contact me.
Yeah,
well.
and from for my part, just very briefly, Dave's mentioned Stephanie. I had a conversation with Stephanie just last Sunday morning about a follow-up conference to this conference, looking at the trans issue. The problem is with all these things, thinking about another exclusion that goes on. We talk about BAME people, don't we? And we talk about finding a role for BAME people in society. I'm half Indian, half English. I am the A of BAME, or a bit of it, if you like. But when we say black, there's a huge difference between someone who's Caribbean and Nigerian. When we say Asian, there's a massive difference between someone who's Indian, like me, and someone who's Pakistani or Bangladeshi. For instance, Indian kids and Chinese kids, all Asian, do really well in education. Pakistani and Bangladeshi kids are failed by education. Very often. So when we band everyone together, perhaps we don't do justice to anything. So our plan is, and we keep you in touch with this, to do a conference just around the issue of P, if you like, which is a gender-based issue rather than a sexuality-based issue, as you know. So we will be onto that. Jane, a tough one for you here, but well, not a tough question to ask, but a tough situation. In the light of all of that fantastic research and information you've just provided us with, why don't the bishops get off the fence and show leadership?
Oh, why? When we had the results of the survey, we sent them, and when I say we, I mean Bishop David and Bishop Paul, to each of the diocesan bishops and asked them to look at safeguarding practices in their diocese to protect LGBT people. Of the few responses that I got, most said it's not an issue in my diocese, at which point I wanted to scream and say it is. I think that we have not been seen, we've not been heard, we've been seen as it just being a couple of us. And so the more that people can write and share their experiences, if they feel able, either anonymously or personally with their bishop, and explain that this is an issue that is affecting many people, that we'll get that up the agenda. The Church of England has to come off the fence. It will be pushed off the fence, as Andrea and others have been saying, by government legislation that is waking up to the harm that's being done. But we should be, I believe, for the sake of the gospel, leading the way of how we protect people. And going back to our theology, no theology that or message from Jesus ever caused anybody harm. But Jesus was extremely clear about anyone who causes a young person harm will not be welcome in the kingdom of God. And I think religious leaders need to, frankly, become a little bit more humble about and not be so hard-hearted and proud about the way they think they need to stand up to society. They know that their theology is doing harm, and they need to come back and understand why we see things differently. Anyway, the Living in Love and Faith work of the Church of England will be out soon. That will give us more resources. But more importantly, there is a group that will launch soon to try and unite voices across the UK. Watch this space. If I can just say, if you're interested in helping us with the ban, look and follow Twitter @banct.org. There'll be a lot of work happening there in the next few months. And if you're interested in working within the Church of England, keep an eye on my own timeline, because we've got big news coming for you soon.
It's also worth saying that Andrea was speaking earlier, and I was talking as well with her about the Equalities Act 2010. and it's an important thing to say that the hierarchy of rights there is something where there should be a national debate. As Andrea was pointing out, there's ambiguities, there's things that are set out in the letter of the law but not pursued and followed through on. The government stall and then say they want the law changed, but aren't quite clear about what to do. So as Jane says, we need to stand up and speak out about what we think matters. And this is a national debate, which is why, one of the reasons why we're having this conference now, to call you into that debate and so we can take up our position, whatever the law says, of course. When anyone is abused, that is an abomination, and any safeguarding abuse stands against the law and should be reported anytime.
Yes, if it's okay, I'll just say something quickly. I just want to echo the Ozan Foundation survey. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, it's an eye-opener in itself. But I also feel that, you know, there's an extension that we need to look at to collectively, is also speaking to the Black majority churches. The silence in that community is deafening. And there's certainly a large number of LGBT people within those spaces as well. And as you know, majority of asylum seekers are also from Black nations like Nigeria, Uganda, Malawi, and their stories also need to be echoed. And I want to say thank you to Jane and to everyone, because without us sharing our stories, you know, the bishops will probably think that there is no problem. And I mean, House of Rainbow has been working with a number of young leaders in this church and some clergy in this church who are allies but silent, and some who are clergy but kind of speak up. And I think we need to find a way to address those issues. And I hope that out of the hundreds of people that are signed up to this program today, there might be a number of them in the background, and hopefully we're able to give them the hope and the courage to come forward. Ozan Foundation is doing amazing surveys, and I think we can also do more surveys, you know, to highlight some of the key areas as well. And I just want to say that I want to put that out there so that anyone that feels that they want to connect with us can actually do so.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Judy. It's been great. I'm sure everyone's applauding. They're certainly sending in their thanks for you for your thoughtful, generous, gracious, but straightforward words. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Great. So before we move on, I simply want to say a little bit about being a straight pastor who has worked to build an inclusive church, inclusive not just around the inclusion of LGBT and T people, but working hard around B, A, M, and E as well, and other inclusions. Some of you will know a little bit about Oasis, which is also a charity that I founded a long time ago. And our badge, our symbol, is the circle of Oasis. You would have seen it perhaps on some of the publicity for this, which is our circle of inclusion. Inclusion's an easy thing to talk about, but it's a hard thing to achieve. I'd like to, in the next couple of minutes, speaking as an ally of LGBT people, just say a few things about the role that church leaders on this call and straight people on this call can play. I want to tell you just very briefly 3 stories. I have a friend who's taking part in a conference with me in just a couple of weeks about something else. He is a really prominent leader in our society. He's a bit of a household name. He sat and had a coffee with me before the lockdown began. He's about my age, a little bit younger. And he said to me, Steve, he said, this is the truth. He said, I grew up within Black Pentecostalism. I was a Christian. As I grew up, I discovered as well that I was gay. At the age of 21, I sat down by myself and realized that I couldn't be a Christian and gay. There was nothing I could do about the fact that I was gay. I'd struggled and struggled, but I was gay. I had to accept it. So that's the day I chose to be no longer a Christian. I'll tell you a story about a good friend of mine whom I saw crying in a communion service that I was leading a few years ago. I thought I'd said something to upset him. I often do say things to upset people. And so after the service, not intentionally, of course, it just comes naturally to me to do those kind of things. So after the service, I wandered across to him and I put my arm around him and I said, I'm sorry, is there something I said that has hurt you? And this is what he said. He said, no, Steve. He said, what I realized during this communion service, you should know that this friend of mine is in his late 30s. He's a school teacher. He is gay. He is a recovering alcoholic, and he's had all sorts of problems with eating disorders and various other things, and never at that point have been in a relationship with anyone, a sexual relationship with anyone. So he said to me, no, Steve, you've not upset me. It's just as I sat here, I suddenly realized, for the first time in my life, I realized that my problem isn't that I'm gay. My problem is that I'm evangelical. That is what's caused me so many problems. So, some of you who are older may know that through the 90s, I used to work in TV all the time on GMTV and for BBC One. And I had a friend whose name was Billy. And Billy was a floor manager. And I worked with him at ITV often, early in the mornings, along with Mr. Motivator and Lorraine Kelly and all that gang. And one day I had breakfast with Billy. They always used to call me the TV vicar on GMTV. I had a breakfast with Billy and he told me about his problems in life. He was gay. He had a number of other issues that he was trying to come to terms with. And he began spilling out some of these problems that he faced to me. And then he looked at me. His words changed my life, actually. He looked at me and he said, Steve, he said, I'm telling you all these things, but here's the reality. I know you're a vicar. Please do not tell me that church is the answer. It's not the answer. My life's tough enough already without church being thrown in to make it more complicated. We have to do something about these things. So I would say to those of you who are allies, church leaders, our task is to stand up. I asked Jane that question about why the bishops don't stand up. Andrea talked about the fact that Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin had looked down and said he was ashamed of the church. We need church leaders to stand up and affirm a different way. It takes huge amounts of courage. We've been asked numerous times through the questions and answers why church leaders are unable to do this. I've never been excommunicated from a denomination, but when I stood up and said that Oasis would welcome gay people and would celebrate their civil partnerships, and that when gay marriage became an opportunity, we would celebrate their marriages, my denomination threatened that I would be excluded if things didn't change. I explained to them that things couldn't change with me because I was committed to this. I'm a Baptist minister, and as Andrea says, the Baptist denomination is moving slowly to a better place, on this. I was, and the organization I founded, the Oasis Trust, was thrown out of the Evangelical Alliance. It was really hard. There are friends I thought were my friends who've never spoken to me again. Conferences I used to speak at have never been open to me again. We lost funding, huge amounts of funding. And of course, this is why it's hard. Often pastors, leaders, bishops come to see me to sit down and talk. They always tell me that if I tell anyone their names, they deny they were there. It's always in a little cafe just across the road from the offices where I stand. Now, I guess we go there together. And I say to them, I understand the issue. If you're a vicar, you might be scared of losing your house, your vicarage. You might be scared of losing your security and the security for your children. If you edit a magazine or a newspaper, you're scared of losing subscribers. If you run a Christian agency, a charity, you're scared of losing funding. There's always a reason why people have a private theology which is different to their public stance. And the truth is, there are many, many, many Christian leaders in this country who have a public stance which is different to their private theology. Someone quite recently said to me, Steve, I would love to write a book like the one that you wrote around this. It wasn't a book that I wrote, actually, it was a paper, but that was the one. But I can't do that yet. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we need to recover a place where we find the courage together to step up, to step out. When I made the statements I made a decade or so back publicly, I was told that Oasis Uganda and Oasis India, other Oasis countries would leave Oasis as a result. It's a huge decision to make. But the truth is that didn't happen. The truth is that Oasis is in a healthier place than it was back then by a long, 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 long way, partly because we're being true to ourselves. I've found that in actual fact, most people are scared of someone else. How many times are there where those of you who are preachers have gone to a church to speak and you stand up at the end of the service, and as people leave the door, they shake your hands and they say, thank you so much for saying that. Someone needed to say that. That was so good. Our vicar won't like that. Our church leaders won't like that, but that was so good. They all go home. And then the vicar comes up to you and says, that was so good. That was so good. I don't know how it's going to go down with our people, but that was so good. If I had £5 for every time that I lived through that experience, I would be able to fund much more work in this area than we can at the moment. In other words, we're all scared of someone else. And that's why it takes people of courage to stand up and begin to make the difference. Everybody's afraid of someone else. The tide, however, is turning, I believe. I often use a little phrase. I say, the gracious tide of inclusion is washing up the beach, and the sandcastle of resistance is slowly being overwhelmed. And perhaps that's the way forward, through our love, through our care, through us resisting, being angry, through demonstrating grace, but moving forward steadily.